Hello and welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast, the space where ideas turn into actions and dreams become reality. I'm your host, Beenish Mirza, and in each episode I will sit down with some really wonderful, incredible women who've taken a spark of inspiration and transformed into something so meaningful. These are real stories of purpose, passion, and perseverance. So wherever you're listening from, settle in and get ready to be inspired. Hi Sameera, so lovely to have you here on the Coaching Chapters podcast. I'm so excited, particularly with your theme and your topic in your book. So it'd be wonderful if you could just start off and just tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and the wonderful work that you're doing.
Sure. So honored to be here, Beenish. Thank you for having me. So I've had a really interesting career. I didn't anticipate working in the field of sexual health with Muslims, but I'm an occupational therapist. So for about 18 years, I've worked in the space of supporting different populations with their struggles. And for me, very early on, I ended up in Muslim spaces. So I ended up working in Islamic schools in Canada, specifically addressing mental health for immigrants and refugees because these students and families weren't receiving support. So there was a gap. And in this work of being in the schools and in Muslim spaces where I lived, I started noticing other gaps that existed. So, adolescent Muslims trying to navigate being Muslim in the West, parents being really confused about how do I support my kids? They're struggling. Teachers also in schools noticing challenges. So, I realized that the barrier is that teaching sexual health held such stigma. And so the schools were not teaching that topic. And I remember it was, I think God just gave me an epiphany of why can't we create like a custom program? And I had been doing that with mental health in with Muslims for a few years by then. So I was like, let's just create an Islamic sexual health curriculum. And in doing that and working with the Islamic studies staff, it was a really collaborative effort. It worked. I think we were able to work with parents, work with teachers, the students, and we centered Islamic values and then taught sexual health from that perspective. And this was, 2010, so 15 years ago now. And so since then, I've just noticed gaps. And I think that's been kind of a hallmark of my career has been I notice gaps. Why aren't we doing anything about them? And also really bringing in nuance that we don't typically bring in. So since then, I've worked in nonprofit spaces, in leadership positions. I've done sexual abuse prevention work. I've worked in schools. And then 5 years ago, I realized another gap. And so I decided to start my own thing with sexual health for Muslims, which really centers Islamic traditions of the soul. So I think I've had a gap-oriented career. So that's how I summarize my work as an overview.
I just find that so remarkable because actually, when you were speaking about some of the gaps you noticed and identified, it feels very relevant, right? With a number of issues the Muslim society and communities are facing, with increase in maybe divorce rates and just teens getting really lost within what their deen is about. So, yeah, no, that sounds really, really relevant. And I guess what parts of your own story do you feel most shaped your understanding of sexual health through the lens of that Islamic psychology?
Yeah, I think I was really blessed in that I wasn't raised with shame-based perspectives of sexual health. It was taught to me from a very like medical, practical perspective. And so I think as someone who has always wanted to go a little bit deeper with my Muslimness, I've been seeking more. So I've been wanting to really experience God's presence inwardly, whereas as Muslims, we're raised to try and seek it outwardly through practice. And so in my own spiritual journey of seeking, as I've made those steps forward, I'm like, wait, my professional life needs to catch up. So what the way I address sexual health now is so different than 15 years ago when I started, but it parallels my personal journey. So the more spiritual I became as a person, I'm like, wait, this work is missing the soul. So I was like, let's pivot. And even now I'm noticing more gaps, in the work. And so I feel like my spiritual personal journey has really informed the professional one. And something I really strive is me embodying the work. So me being the work and not just doing it. And I think that's been a huge shift that has come with time and experience.
Yeah, I really love when it was very valuable when you said, it was brought to you as a child in a very medical way. But so much of what you just said and your book refers to it from a soulful perspective.
Mhm.
I'm just like demystifying, what does it actually mean? Sexual health, soulfully from an Islamic perspective. In your view, what does that mean?
Yeah, I like to start with Muslims understanding that we are born with a soul. It's with us our whole life. It exists before we're born and after we die. So the soul is really central to our existence. And our soul contains many aspects of our life, including our sexual health. So a lot of times we are conceptualizing sexual health as sex or this thing that gets activated right before we get married, or worse, when we're struggling and we're like, oh, something's off. And so, what I'm trying to do is position sexual health as something natural that develops with us, just as our soul develops as well, right? So when we hit puberty and we become spiritually accountable to God, that's when our sexual health development really amplifies. And we know that, right? We know that these feelings and hormones and confusion kind of arises, and teenagers are needing more support at that time, not only to navigate the world, but they're accountable to Allah now. Their parents are no longer accountable for them. So if we see sexual health as part of the soul's development, it's like, oh, that's natural. It's normal. It's God created. It's not this thing. It's something that develops naturally and it's God created. So I think that takes away the shame and also amplifies secular understandings of sexual health, which talks about sexuality and relationships in our body, but it's really devoid of any sort of spiritual framework. And so when Muslims are trying to learn about sexual health and they only see mainstream perspectives, they're like, where do I fit in as a Muslim? I don't feel included. I don't feel like my values or spirituality are there. So we tend to ignore that information and saying it's not relevant. But if we're doing it from a soulful perspective, now we're like, oh, that speaks to me and my worldview. And so that's a huge paradigm shift, I think, for us as Muslims.
Yeah. No, I really, really like that because actually it sounds so basic, but in reality, it's such solid advice, right? That actually it follows through for us. We go through phases, we go through journeys beyond, the taboo subjects we think it is. There's just so much more to it. So for listeners, listening in, what falls under that umbrella of sexual health from your view and the work that you do?
Hmm. So if we think about even a child who is, let's say, elementary school aged, 5, 6, 7, they don't have sexual health per se, but they have physical health, emotional, and spiritual health. And those are really foundations to help kids understand their bodies as they get older. So we're not sexual beings when we're a child, but we still have other aspects of our health. And as we think about different life stages, puberty, right? We think about young adults who are now wanting to get married and find a spouse. And then we think about, are we raising a family and having kids, all the way through to older adults who we tend to forget still have sexual health. We want to think about sexual health as being inclusive of our emotional well being, being inclusive of our physical health, being inclusive of our spiritual health. And that's really the model that I outline in my book is that sexual health is a culmination of emotional, physical, and spiritual health. So if we start with those foundations when we're younger, then we're actually setting ourselves up for more sexual health content. Like, how do you explain puberty and relationships to a teenager when they don't even understand their bodies, when they don't understand how to express emotions, when they don't understand how to set boundaries in relationships? So everything builds upon itself with this topic of sexual health. So that's how I would see it, as these everyday conversations that are not necessarily sexual in nature, but they're emotional, spiritual, and physical as well.
That's a really, I think, a useful insight, particularly as a parent, just thinking about it. I know so many of my friends, even now, even my generation, probably still do it, where we just don't label the human body parts. And actually, going back to your point, where if it's just science, then why
Yeah.
make it taboo, why the silence around it? And actually pivoting back to the bit you spoke about around shame and silence. I mean, in your view and the work that you've done, what are the impacts of that silence, particularly on young children, and maybe not young children, but young teens, young women, married women? What do you see are the common issues coming out from that shame and silence and lack of awareness and education from an Islamic perspective?
I think the consequences are pretty big from what I even see in my therapeutic practice. I think shame really keeps us stuck and almost disassociated or separate from this part of our life of having sexual health. So it can mean that women struggle, but then are stuck in that struggle and kind of don't know what to do. A lot of times, women may not even realize that what they're going through, they need help for. So they stay tolerant with struggling and don't know how or if to reach out for support. I think there's an internalization of something's wrong with me, right? Shame is a lot about unworthiness, something being wrong. So instead of seeing sexual health as being God created and that issues will be normal, all of us will encounter sexual health issues in our lifespan. We may think something is wrong. And so then these religious misunderstandings come in, right? Of trying to make sense of things like, is this a punishment? Have I done something wrong? Did God create me in like the non-ideal way? So I think shame keeps us stuck and frozen, and that can really prevent us from finding movement, support, from even seeking information because we may think it's impermissible to seek information. So the consequences are something that I see every day, whether it's in my therapy practice or just in conversations with Muslims. It's really dire in terms of keeping us stuck. And then the struggle gets worse in that way.
And then do you mind just digging in a bit deeper when you spoke about, some of the misconceptions? What are they and how are you trying to unpick them or make them a little bit clearer to your audience?
Mm. I think one of the biggest ones is that sexual health is somehow not related to our being as a Muslim. It's seen as this separate thing. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions because it creates distance and dissociation, but then also doesn't give us permission to learn, for the sake of Allah and for seeking knowledge that is beneficial. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions is it's separate from who we are as a Muslim. So therefore we can't learn about it. I think there's a reduction of the topic down, like we spoke about earlier. People see the first three letters and think sexual health means sex, and then that's relegated to a certain point in life. So let's not touch it. And that means then that we're not seeking wellness checks for our physical or sexual well being. We're not seeking information. It just limits what we really do. I think there's another misconception that knowing religious rulings is enough. And I think we see that reduction of Islam down to religious rulings, which takes away any sort of spirituality and ethics from the conversation. So what does it mean to have ethical learning about sexual health and see it beyond the black and white? Because Islam really doesn't have that much black and white, but we think that it does. So I think these misconceptions are the broader ones that I see. And then they also lead to other misconceptions coming up. So feel like there's an endless number, but those are the biggest ones that are themes I think that I've seen.
No, thank you. And then I guess you alluded to a bit about the different stages that all Muslims, not just women, go through. But if we pivot back to your book now, how does your book particularly support women or Muslims through those different stages that you spoke about?
Yeah, I think the book is really unique in that it looks at every topic of sexual health that you could experience in your lifetime. So I wanted to write it for a Muslim audience so they could feel themselves in the book. So let's say there's a 22-year-old Muslim man or woman who's going to pick up the book. They could flip to the chapter on the search for a spouse, or they could flip to the chapter on foundations of sexual health, so anatomy and physiology, or they could skip ahead to the chapter on marital intimacy. So, what I love about this book is that you can go through it from a topical perspective of where am I at in my stage of life now? What's missing, and where do I see myself wanting to go? So, let me kind of learn and prevent. But then also for someone who has no clue, they could start with the chapters on what does it mean to have sexual health as a Muslim? So I love that it's written as a guide and it's really helpful in terms of a Muslim being able to pick it up and use it how they want. And I really love that. Like, if you want to learn about struggles with pornography, you go to that part of the book. If you want to learn about, oh my gosh, I have an OB-GYN appointment in 2 weeks, there's an entire section on how to navigate that and feel confident. So, as I'm talking about it, I'm just really grateful that it's a guide for any topic. And so I love that Muslims can now access this work without any barriers. Like, it's a book and it's yours. Like, you don't have to go through a gatekeeper anymore, which is such a blessing, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I know when we've spoken in the past, you're so proud of how long it's taken you to publish the book, years, and how much work and how much education has gone into it. So the work you're doing is definitely very meaningful. And I think that part that you called out around it being a personalized guide, well, actually, the tools are there, but it's not prescriptive in a way that you have to follow it. As opposed to speaking to someone and just hearing their advice or getting their Islamic perspective on it, which can feel quite shameful in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think a lot of times we're looking for advice or we want to be told what to do. And in this case, I wanted to make the book help people think. So I wanted them to feel empowered themselves instead of providing like a formulaic outline. And so the fact that there are reflection questions, fill in the blank diagrams, I want Muslims to feel confident, not only learning, but empowering themselves and really reflecting. I think as Muslims, we're not encouraged to reflect if we're raised with a this is Islam, this is what it is perspective. Critical thinking is seen as something that's problematic and uncomfortable. And I wanted to give people permission that the book is written compassionately and the voice is like you. So I'm really encouraging Muslims to fill out the questions, reflect, not feel urgency in making decisions, but really reflecting and sitting with what's there. And then the book, inshallah, supporting them with what they need.
Mhm. And I know on your social media and previously you've mentioned, it's a very lengthy book. It's a very rich amount of resources available. And at the start of the conversation, you did mention around how many gaps you identified, and a lot of your work's based on just gaps and you having that passion to fill them. So particularly for this particular audience, which may be more women based, what were some of those female-based gaps you identified that are being addressed and that resources provided within your book?
Mm. I think I see a lot of times Muslim women are placed in situations where they're being reactive about their sexual health. It's almost like, let's say we're at a certain life stage It's like we're learning about an aspect of our sexual health as we're going through it, right? So we're trying to conceive and we're struggling with it. And now it's like, oh, now I need to go back and learn about my cycle, fertility, infertility, natural ways to improve conception. It's like we're learning about things too late. It's either when we're going through something or we're struggling. And that to me has been a source of frustration, obviously, as a Muslim woman myself, but also seeing other Muslims struggle. It's painful for me to see that because I'm like, it doesn't need to be that way. And so, what I'm hoping the biggest gap that's filled is not being reactive anymore, but also thinking ahead proactively, right? So we're thinking ahead to maybe a few years down the road, or what am I curious about myself that I don't know with regards to my sexual health? And so instead of playing catch up, my hope is that we can be more proactive and preventative and understanding that that's an Islamic principle of prevention being so crucial to taking care of our God-given bodies and sexual health. So really giving ourselves permission to go ahead a little bit more and not feel like we're playing catch up. And I'm really hoping that the book does that. And that's why that developmental approach was so important for me, because we don't often know what to look ahead for. We don't know what to inform ourselves about. So the book does that for us so we can kind of pick and choose where we want to go.
Yeah. I think, so many people will really resonate with that point that you said. And it sounds like, I can really see the benefit of, when people pick up your book, they'll really benefit from it. And actually, that piece that you spoke about, how when you're in the moment and you don't know what to do, you're seeking that information. And then let's be honest, from an Islamic perspective, you add that Islamic layer to it. What's halal, what's not, what's haram, what's permissible, what isn't. So for those people that, maybe are still a bit stuck and they're still going through it and they haven't had the resources that your book provides, what would, in your view, what's your advice around how they can bridge that gap quickly now to
Yeah.
move forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I would first encourage is for Muslims to sit down and really reflect on what their thoughts and emotions are telling them about their stuckness. So, and the book has reflection questions like, as you think about your identity as a Muslim, how do you feel hearing the word sexual health? What do you think about it? When you hear Islam with sexual health, what comes to mind? So, what I'm hoping will be helpful for people is to paint the landscape of what's inside of them so that we first understand what we're working with. So, we're building self awareness. So, let's say a Muslim woman does this and they see like halal haram, religious rulings, discomfort with their body, shame around it, feeling like it's wrong. Well, now you know what you're working with. So then I would really encourage some re-education around that. Like, how can we see our bodies as a responsibility or an amana from God, right? How do we see taking care and learning about our bodies with the intention of taking care of what God has created? So it's moving away from these rigid black and white understandings and really broadening out it to our intentions, right? To understanding how God created us, which a lot of us don't realize, right? A lot of us don't understand the spiritual perspectives of our soul. And then a lot of us don't maybe understand our ethical responsibility towards ourselves, right? Of taking care of our life and our health, which are important parts of Sharia as well. So I think once we have self-awareness about what's internal, then we can start to notice, oh, this is very limiting. It's very black and white. It's not comfortable. And so I'm going to start compassionately working with what I am working with. So I think compassion is key. The harshness we don't want because we already face so much of that as Muslims. So this book really centers compassion and self-accountability. So I'm going to do what's uncomfortable, but I'm also going to treat myself compassionately knowing that Allah also sees me with compassion as well. So I'm definitely against this harshness that we're seeing a lot of times, and really wanting to bring in softness and also doing the work.
Yeah, and I love that. I love anything related to compassion, particularly from a coaching perspective. But what that really feeds into is that whole piece where actually people, particularly women, do struggle alone. They don't feel comfortable seeking that support or having those circles, even through friends and family, whether it's through conceiving or marital issues, or even if it's like women's health related concerns. It feels like just pray for the best, speak to your doctor, and that's as far as you go. There's a lot of self help avenues that people follow. So, I guess, again, in your view, what are some of the signs that, particularly women, depending on what phase they're going through, what challenges they're facing, how can they start to notice whether actually they might be in a position now where they need to seek that professional health?
Mm.
Seek that, sorry, professional help from somebody.
Yeah, that's a really important question because I find that when, for example, clients are coming to me for support, it's often really down the road. So it's almost not too late, but they've been struggling for a while. So something I encourage women and men, whoever's listening to the podcast, to do is thinking about the impact that this struggle is having, right? So if you're noticing emotional impacts, right? Like it's something that is heavy, it's on your mind a lot, it's really preventing you from being present. You're growing frustrated. You also are stuck and don't know what to do. So maybe for the last couple months, you've tried those self help avenues. So let's say an example is pain with sexual intercourse, right? So you're married and you're having pain with intimacy. And let's say you've tried different things. You've tried relaxing, you've tried using lubrication, and it's not working. At that point, I would say the frequency of how long you've struggled and the intensity are what you want to look at. So try one or two things. And if it's not supporting you, I would reach out for support soon. And support could look like seeking a professional to educate you about what could be going on. It could mean, like you said, visiting a physician if that's helpful, or an OB-GYN. Support could be speaking to a therapist, right? So support can look like many different things. I'm of the mindset, do it sooner rather than later. There's no harm in seeking support. As soon as you have a question that you can't answer, or you're noticing something and you don't know what's going on, seek information. And I think that's the part that where we shift from being reactive to being preventative early. So even a question or thinking ahead are great kind of signs that you need support. But if you're struggling, I would say early on, please seek support early on so that you aren't alone, because that's something that far too many of us struggle with, is like you said, struggling alone, and then things can often feel heavier when you're alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you're doing so much wonderful stuff in this space to make it accessible, particularly for women as well. And so, do you mind just elaborating a little bit more? What is the work that you're doing? How can people get involved if they are listening to this and they do need that support, and they'd love to work with you? How can they get involved with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think I try to make my work accessible, especially on social media. And then my website has courses that people can purchase into. And I try to address the biggest topics online, because really trying to reduce gaps to access information. So, courses, I offer consultation. So, I often have Muslims say, I'm struggling with X topic. Can we just meet once? And I think that's a great place to start, because at least you'll get empowered information and some practical strategies. And then I'm blessed to work with Muslims more on their journey through therapy. So it's people who have tried certain things, or they're struggling and they need longer term support. So I'm really trying to meet people where they're at through different avenues, knowing that not everyone's ready to commit to a therapy journey, but it might be that they buy an online course and in the privacy of their own home, which is really helpful, they can access information on intimacy or on trauma. So I think it's hopefully my work's meeting Muslims where they're at. And then this book is kind of the bigger picture of, okay, here's something for everyone in terms of what they can access.
Yeah. I love that. It's so fascinating. Honestly, I think what you're doing is so inspirational. And I'm just conscious that if people are listening to this and they are a little bit overwhelmed and they know they want to explore this a little bit further, what is just initial, they place the order for the book, they're waiting for it to arrive, but two or three things you would advise them to do just to help them get that little bit unstuck or get things moving or make them even confident enough to just be vulnerable enough to just explore what is going on for them.
Yeah, that's such a common feeling that I think many Muslim women especially have. I would say some compassionate self-reflection of just thinking about, okay, this is where I'm at in my life right now. And this is what I feel comfortable about with my body. And these are the parts that I have question marks about or that I'm uncomfortable with, right? So just thinking about life stage and what feels a bit like it's unknown, and just some self-reflection about identifying those points. And then even reflecting on their identity as a Muslim and how that feels to think about, I have sexual health as a Muslim. When I say that, how do I feel? What does my body do? Do I get uncomfortable? Do I feel curious? So just some compassionate self-reflection. And I would encourage people who are in that stuck place, just once you get the book, start with chapters 1 and 2, like Islam, spirituality, the soul, and sexual health, like those two chapters in and of themselves, I think may help women shift their understanding about their Muslimness and having sexual health. And I would encourage people to take it slow. I think sometimes there might be urgency. I need to deal with something. I need to play catch up. And I would say take it slow, right? Like our life is going to be full of opportunities to learn. So this isn't something that you quickly learn and put away and say you're done. And so I want to encourage people to take it slow. And it says in the book, like, read a couple pages. If it's too much, put it away and then come back. This isn't a book you read like a novel. It's gonna be, I think for a lot of people, it's a lot of information. So I say read 1 or 2 pages, answer the questions, put it away, and come back. And it's
Yeah.
okay. It's gonna be there on your bookshelf when you need it.
And it's like you're saying, you might be scared, but don't be scared. Take it in your own time. Watch as much of the movie as you want to.
Exactly, exactly. Because I think for me, like I've been in this work for so long, I have to remind myself the average Muslim is going to feel really differently. So while for me, this is like second nature, this work, for most people, it's not. And I think giving them permission to think it's not all or nothing, it's a little bit, and it's integration, which I'm sure relates to coaching. There's a little bit of work, you allow things to integrate, you process, you implement, and then you come back. So it's a constant cycle that we're revisiting. It's not a linear line, and that's something that's really important, I think.
Absolutely. And just listening to you actually, just summarizing a bit of what you were telling me just then, it sounds like a lot of it is just um, normal lifestyle health as well, but actually adding that layer of being Muslim and all those different systems and backgrounds and cultural nuances, generational differences that we've come up with are all blockers that are we put in place to prevent ourselves from accessing those resources and knowing what to do. But then also what's so beautifully done with your work is it's got that Islamic lens to it as well, which is, it ties back to why it's important to do it. Actually, it's not because you're being nosy or digging for extra information. It's actually Islam wants us to. We have a right to know about this. And so, as you were speaking, things like Not going to a gynecologist, not getting a checkup, not getting your smear test, feeling uncomfortable, raising issues around menstruational cycles, all of this. Where do you think it comes from, in your view, from the work that you've done? What are some of the common themes that actually listeners are listening to? They could probably relate to. Actually, that is where not wanting to visit a gynecologist or getting a smear test comes from.
I think there are a few key patterns and trends that I've noticed. I think the first is our upbringing. And I say this with so much compassion that parents do the best they can with what they know at the time. And I think a lot of times when we're children and teenagers and the information we receive is limited, our questions are shut down due to parental shame. When we maybe attend Islamic institutions like Sunday school, or we have learnings about Islam that kind of negate the body, we start to gain an impression that this part of us is not really permissible to go towards. So when we don't see the information reflected in our environment, we don't develop the language, we don't develop the self-awareness, and a lot of times that leads to us dealing with things ourselves, right? So let's say a girl is having really painful menstrual cycles and she's 12. If her parents have never spoken to her about menstrual cycles or pain, she doesn't have the language. She may not have the awareness. She likely thinks it's normal, or she thinks something's wrong with her. And then we have shame develop, right? So it like as I'm sharing this, something that seems simple in terms of lack of access to information can have such dire impacts. So I think upbringing, our religious institutions, our cultural baggage that you mentioned so well, I think a lot of us misunderstand Islam with our ethnic and cultural backgrounds as well. And I think also what we see in society, we may not resonate with as Muslims, so we push it away, right? So we hear it's good to get pap smears, let's say, but we're like, but I'm Muslim, that doesn't relate to me. So all of these just create barriers to then us struggling alone or not knowing that we're struggling. So I think for me, like that's why the parenting chapter in the book was so crucial. I wrote it twice because it wasn't satisfactory for me. It's such a crucial chapter because parents and families impact us in many ways, including with this topic. So I really wanted parents to feel empowered, not shamed, to bring up these conversations in a very natural, normal way.
And you know what? That's my most exciting chapter that I want to read, because being a parent, and I know a lot of my listeners, my followers, my friends will be as passionate about this. It's stressing me out. It's making me really excited to say, actually, what do I want to unlearn? What do I want to relearn? What does it mean? And those resources aren't available. You can't just go to a sister circle or a community or a mosque and just get that information. So I guess without giving too much away on the parenting chapter, it would be really, wonderful if you could just leave us with a bit of insight into what to expect from there, and maybe two or three golden nuggets that us parents can start to implement with our children, both daughters and sons.
Mm. I think what you said about unlearning and relearning, that's the first section of the chapter, is empowering parents themselves. It's pausing the what to do, how to say it, and when to really say, wait, what has been my experience with sexual health as a parent? So there's a lot of Islamic context about that that can help parents. And then there's a lot of reflection questions. And I actually have an activity where for parents who are married, spouses actually sit together and they're like, how do we want to raise our kids? Who's going to say what? What are we comfortable with? So I want parents tag teaming, whether you're married or co-parenting. That's another piece that's missing, the burden falling a lot on mothers. And I think fathers play such an important role for both daughters and sons as well. And then the chapter goes into using a prophetic saying to help break down what to teach when. So from 0 to 7, you play with kids. From 7 to 14, you teach them. And then from 14 plus, you befriend and advise them. So then the chapter goes into for 0 to 7, what do you teach and how? 7 to 14, 14 plus. And there are conversation starters, as well as scripts that parents can adapt so they can quickly look through and pick these topics, and based on where their child is at, what age, and what they've been taught. And then there's also a section on parents understanding that using natural learning moments. So we don't want to sit our children down at the dinner table and start talking about these topics. But let's say your 3-year-old's taking a bath. Perfect time to start about educating their body parts as they're washing their body, or when you're teaching how they make wudu. Let's say your 8-year-old is having friendship issues, right? And then you're teaching her the language of emotions and boundaries. Your 12-year-old, you're noticing, is starting to have feelings, right? For somebody else. That's when you talk about puberty and how feelings are normal and we're not judged for having feelings. We need to work on aligning our feelings with our actions. So it's using what you see happening with your kids and like inserting a bit of the emotional, physical, spiritual, or sexual health content. So parents are not needing to learn all of these things, but they're really the experts of their kids. So the chapter starts with, you're the expert of your kid, not me. Here's how you can use what you know about your child to enhance their education in this area. So I really hope it empowers parents to know that there's no right or wrong thing to do. You're not going to damage your kids. You're not going to fail them. We want to accept that we're all human and we'll make mistakes, and that vulnerability as a parent to try things out and revisit them with your kids so that they always see you as a source of support, ongoing, natural conversations throughout your entire child's life. I think that's the biggest takeaway, which is often in opposition to what parents think, which is a 10-minute chat. Let's just sit down and I'm going to tell you everything. It's like, no, don't do that. Let's just take things easy and look at where your child is at and insert little pieces of wisdom as you go.
Yeah, I think that's such brilliant advice because it's saying that actually what your book's going to allow us to do is re-look at language that we use in everyday scenarios. But actually, as a parent, I'm hearing that I need to activate that emotional intelligence to know when to bring the topic up and keep it natural and keep it flowing and keep it consistent so it doesn't feel like a taboo subject later on down the line, particularly maybe in the teenage years or with all the different challenges going on in the world, it is definitely sounds like something they can't shy away. And the bit that I really appreciated with actually, yes, sit down and discuss how do you want to address this topic. I think, so many of us are so good at doing it when it comes to, what does football look like for our son, or what does swimming look like? What does a reading look like for them? All the ECAs, all of that. But actually, this is such a fundamental part. Just like we focus on Quran and praying and Ramadan, it sounds like there's still a lot parents can take away from this topic as well.
Yeah, I think what you just shared is this intentionality that's missing from this topic because we see it as something that is shameful, taboo, or I'm not going to say anything until my child asks me a question. This sacred intentionality is such an important part, which is happens when we you see this topic from a spiritual perspective. And I think right now it's not seen in that way by the majority of Muslims. But as you're talking about, let's say you and your spouse sitting down and talking about what's important for us, how are we going to do this? How are we going to support each other? How are we going to tell our kids, I know this might feel uncomfortable. We're still going to talk about it. It's okay for it to be uncomfortable. Yeah, the intentionality is often what's missing. We wanna rip the Band-Aid off and be done, and it's going to be uncomfortable for parents to say, "Let me slow down and just take it focusing on myself first before I think about what to do with my kids." that's a big flip in terms of what we're often seeing with parents in this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. You just put it so beautifully. You're so beautifully intelligent, Samira. I love the way you speak. Okay, let's come back to your book and the wonderful work you're doing. What are the three things you're really hoping people take away from your book?
Mm. I really want the reader to feel like their soul is being hugged with compassion. That was so important for me. When I was writing it, I imagined a Muslim in front of me as if I was speaking to them. And I really want them to walk away with that inner hug compassion because I think so often we don't sense that as Muslims. We don't sense even God's compassion or the compassion of other people. So that's one thing I want people to take away. I think the second is to see sexual health as such a normal spiritual part of them. It's not this thing that's separate. It's something that God has created that's within them, and they have permission and time and space to explore that with their intentions. I think the third thing is to see sexual health as something that exists our entire life. So a 14-year-old could actually pick up this book and read it, and so could an 80-year-old. And so that was my hope, is that I wanted to make the book as accessible as possible and not limited to what I see with other books on this topic, which is marital intimacy, right? Like it's just so reduced down. I'm like, no, I again, a gap. I would want someone who is a teenager all the way to an older generation to pick up the book and benefit from it. And also to benefit themselves, but then ask, well, who else in my life would benefit from this? Right. So inshallah, as we read the book, I'm hoping that it will change how we show up. And I think as Muslims, that's really important that we work on ourselves, and this book really isn't only about sexual health. I see it more also about the soul. So really, what can I work on with myself so that I show up differently in the world? And I think we need more of that instead of just the externalization. I think we need more of us working on ourselves so that that ripples out to other people as well.
Yeah, and I love that because I was having a conversation the other day about modesty and how, it's flicked back to it being so physical when actually so much of that is mental, that's social. What are you, where are your thoughts going from a modesty perspective? And actually, it sounds like your work is also saying, actually dig down to your soul. How can you better, your internal thoughts, your internal being, your internal way around navigating this topic?
Absolutely. Yeah, that framework of inside out versus outside in, which I think is maybe one of the biggest challenges this book will pose, is seeing it from the inside out. So that's where I'm hoping the change happens.
Yeah, it sounds like a book for life, not for a season. Um,
I hope so. That's the way I wrote it. I really see this as something that you could put on your shelf and then take it when you need it, and it'll be there when you need it. So it's not a one-time read. So I'm hoping that that's the case when people read it.
Thank you so much, Samira. Honestly, it's always so insightful. I learn so much from you every time I speak to you. So if you could just let us know, where can people follow the work that you're doing? Where can they get a hold of your book globally? I know you've shared a limited time a discount code, so I'll definitely put that in the show notes. But if you could just share that information, that'd be really helpful.
Yes, so my website and Instagram, Sexual Health for Muslims, is where people can find how to order the book. It's available internationally online through Routledge. So the book is linked on social media and my website. So yeah, it's been out for about 20 days now, which it feels like it's been much longer, but yeah, people can get it wherever they live in the world. So I'm excited to see how it resonates from people around the globe because we're so diverse as Muslims, and I'm excited to see how people resonate with it.
Thank you so much. And I think your last, piece of advice, if you want What would you encourage people to do to really spread the word, not just with your book, but the topic in itself? How can they really start integrating it within their communities, where they live, in their families? What is one way you think is a great way to sort of break that barrier?
Mm. That's a great question. I think start with what is easy and what the low-hanging fruit is. And I would say with yourself first, and then I would say family or friends. So if we think about these concentric circles, we want to start with ourselves and our family and or friends or partner or spouse, and then we can kind of ripple it out to community. I think sometimes we wanna jump into community and then we may forget, "Wait, me, family, friends, people who I care about." And that's been, I think, how this work has spread is word of mouth through friends and family. It hasn't really been through me being in mainstream Muslim spaces because this work is often not brought into those spaces. So I think word of mouth, so sometimes I'll do webinars for groups of friends. Like 5 women will reach out and they'll say, "Hey, we're moms and we want support." I'm like, "Great, let's meet and I'll cater this webinar for you." So I like the personalized start with your own circle first, and then I think the community aspects can bridge kind of later, but I think we need people embodying the work first, before we're out with other people.
I think that's such great practical advice that people would take on board literally now. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for all of your insights, for all of your experiences, and all the wonderful perspectives you're able to share today. So thank you. Wish you the best of luck. I hope you get so rewarded with all the wonderful work you're doing. And thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful knowledge and your story on my podcast. Thank you, Samira.
It's been my honor, Venus. I'm really grateful that as soul-aligned people, we were able to meet, and I'm grateful for your insights and questions. So thank you for this time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Coaching Chapters podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired and reminded you of what's possible when you follow your own calling, your own passion. If you love this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review.